Hello, and welcome to Best Practices for IoT. My name is Donna Perkins, and I'll be your host today. I'm also the Standards Manager for Conexxus, and we're also joined by Kristen Call, who is our moderator for today. I have a couple of housekeeping things to cover with you today. The replay will be made available for the webinar on Conexxus365.org, and that should happen within about a week. You can send questions today directly through the GoToWebinar interface. On your right, you should have a chat option, and please feel free to type in your questions and get those in early. We also have PCI credits available for certain live events. You do need to attend the live event to receive credit for that, but you can connect us at 365@conexxus.org to receive those credits. This is the slide our lawyers make us put in, and it simply says that the opinions expressed today are not those of Conexxus, but are those of our expert speakers. We also want to thank our 2021 Diamond sponsors, and all their help is appreciated. They have made getting through the pandemic and through 2020 and the beginning of 2021 possible for Conexxus and allowed us to get a lot more work done. So we're grateful to our sponsors as always. Conexxus is an independent nonprofit standards body for the convenience and fuel industry. We are member driven, which means our member companies do the heavy lifting and do most of the work for our standards. We provide vision, we advocate for the industry, and we provide education. Conexxus365 is our webinar platform, and we have weekly webinars. Through the summer, it's probably going to be 3 a month instead of 4, but we try to have weekly education series, and you can subscribe to that at Conexxus365.org. Here's how you can connect with us: LinkedIn, 365.org, or Conexxus.org. And now I'd like to hand it over to our moderator, Kristen Call at Intel.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to get us started on best practices in IoT. We'll go to the next slide. I will introduce our speakers. I am joined today with Marty Wolfe, who is the Industry VP and CTO. Marty, why don't you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, thank you, Kristen and Donna. I work for IBM, and I'm the global CTO, which leads technical strategy and our architectures and our offerings across retail, consumer packaged goods, airlines, hospitality, and freight logistics. Pleasure to meet you. Subrata?
I'm assuming it's going to be that typical Subrata, you are on mute.
Yes. Thank you, Marty. Yes, I'm also very excited to be here today. My name is Subrata Roy. I am a managing director in Deloitte Consulting supply chain practice, and I focus on IoT. I have a lot of experience leading large global supply chain digital transformation programs. And I'm also a leader in our smart factory offering, and I work with clients from various industries on projects centered on IoT.
Thank you. And yeah, so just a little bit overview of what we're going to talk about today. This is not going to be a death by PowerPoint. We want this to be interactive, so we're going to hit on a few different topics. The first one is going to be around the business, the trends, the drivers, and Subrata is going to take us through all of that. We've got some technical conversations around IoT. Again, what are the trends that are happening there? What are the drivers making things happen? And what are some of the challenges? And then we're going to look over at the use cases. What are people looking at? And we're not going to necessarily stick to just what's happening in C-stores. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Subrata.
Thank you, Kristen. So if you think about what is going on in the industry, and as Kristen said, it's not all about the C-store. Things that are happening in other parts of the industry impacts convenience stores directly. So what I have in here are some very recent news clippings from various releases that have happened. Left to right, you look at the first thing is the transformation that is going on in the auto sector. For over 150 years, we are used to gas-powered vehicles. Right? You have seen, all of you must have seen, almost every major auto OEM has released plans for moving into the battery electric space. That has a huge impact on convenience stores, and we would talk about that. Then if you go to the next one, you find the transformations happening in the services industry, whether it's the quick service restaurants, the McDonald's, the Burger Kings, the Wendy's and Pizza Huts of the world, or it's the retailers and the grocery store operators, including the regional ones and the national ones like Target, Walmart, or Amazon. There's a lot of technology evolution that is happening with a focus on reducing spend and increasing customer experience. So McDonald's, for example, just released that they are testing automated drive-through ordering at 10 Chicago restaurants. And while it may sound very simple on, hey, I just have somebody ordering by voice, it is not that simple. Right? There's a lot of complexity in just dealing with these kinds of technologies that Marty is going to walk us through. But the bottom line here is that the Amazon effect is really happening really being felt in the services industry. Then if you think about the convenience store and where it sat as a neighborhood store where people would go in to buy gas and then purchase other smaller things, including like non-perishable packaged foods in there, that landscape is also changing. You have ghost kitchens, which are really in communities that people are renting out their kitchens for producing meals, heavily invested by providers such as DoorDash, right? And then there is the whole trend towards healthy eating that is causing more and more of these quick service restaurants to look at their menu and decide what they want to serve their clients. With DoorDash and Uber and all the other services that are there for delivery, you would find that people really hardly need to go to a restaurant or a grocery store for anything. So how do you attract them back to your store is very important. And then finally, it's if you can think about the two different stakeholders that any retail outlet has, it's the consumer and it's the people that work there. When you talk about the consumer, as I said, that the trends are changing in the consumer, right? The consumers are wanting more and more healthy foods. Consumers are wanting more and more fresh produce. They are looking at food safety. They are looking for clean place. And then people, the folks that actually work in the various retail, all of us have seen there's a big shortage of employees, and minimum wage is rising across the board. So in summary, all these industry trends individually may not have an impact, but when you bring them collectively, there's a lot of impact for convenience store. And we're going to talk about that and how we are seeing the market and the industry react to it.
So Subrata, you hit on a few different things. Maybe, go back one slide just a little bit. Is there anything in here around sustainability or, how important is that right now?
Oh, it is very important. And thanks for bringing it up, Kristen. When you look at the food trends forecast that I saw in the middle of the slide here, right? One of the things I mentioned about how consumers are looking for more and more healthy options. People do care about sustainability. People do care about knowing where their food is coming from. So the end-to-end supply chain visibility, the traceability of that produce all the way from the farm to the store, and then making sure that you don't waste food. How do you prevent wastage? Not just because it impacts cost, but it also impacts the sustainability. So there is a lot going on that is driven by consumer habits and the need to see sustainability in any. I mean, if you look at what all the big Fortune 500 companies are disclosing, right? They have a special sustainability report that they're disclosing as part of their financial disclosure. So it is front and center there.
And I know we're going to talk about the business imperatives next, and a lot of content in there. Before you move on, any of these technologies that you're seeing or business use cases, COVID's still around. Anything around touchless technologies that you're seeing here in the driving any business?
Yes, it absolutely is. And the McDonald's use case or the news article that I have here is a prime example of it, right? How do you automate the entire customer experience so that everything can be voice, people don't have to touch anything, and more importantly, and this is where the whole edge and cloud comes up, right? How do you process that information at the edge real time so that if I'm ordering a McDonald's burger, I'm not just sitting there for the information to go to the cloud and then come back to me whether I ordered the right configuration or not. How do you enable that at the edge is very important. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So the business, I'm calling it the business imperative for change, which is why change and why now? And I think all of you would recognize that change is constant. And if you don't change, pretty much you perish. Right? So there are two reasons why we see clients have to change. Either you have to increase your revenue or reduce your cost. On the top line, increasing the revenue, if you are a convenience store owner and you know that the whole auto industry is moving from gas powered to electric powered vehicles, you have to think about different sources of revenue. And that's the reason why we discussed like QSRs and grocery in particular in the previous slide. Right? You have to think about how can you attract customers to your store who are going to buy maybe some grocery items. Maybe they're going to buy a sandwich from you. So think about grocery and QSRs to get new sources of revenue. And while you do that, understand that consumer is the king. Gone are the days when you could tell, hey, this is all I got, take it or lose it, right? The consumers have many choices. We saw those many choices earlier. The biggest thing is when you attract them, how do you retain them in your stores? And consumer is the key. Convenience and experience matters, right? Their experience, when they come into the store, their experience of how they see the store, including things we have heard of, dimly lit stores, or how retailers place things on the various shelves, they all matter. So if you got to think of a grocery and a QSR, you got to focus on the customer. And then safety and cleanliness are very important in a post-COVID world. That's not optional. Like if you're going to run a grocery or a thing like grocery and QSR, if you're going to focus on the customer, safety and cleanliness are imperative that you have to do. Then on the reduction of the cost, take the flip side of it. If you have if the labor cost of serving those customers is going to be immense, and it is and grocery is a very low margin business. It is not possible to scale up everything on a one-for-one basis, meaning for $1 of revenue you can scale up in a certain way, right? You need automation, and that's what we'll be talking about. Compliance costs, inspection costs, making sure cleaning costs, all of those matter, right? All of those will add up. How do you manage those? Big part of this is energy management. A convenience store of tomorrow is going to look very different from the convenience store of today. It should have more equipment, freezers, ovens, more sensors. All of those have energy, consume energy. How do you manage energy? And then finally, the sustainability, it kind of goes into both the food wastage, the end-to-end visibility of the supply chain, and also sustainability from an energy management standpoint. So in other words, the summary of this slide is that we feel that you don't really have a choice. For the convenience store owners to survive, you need to kind of pivot from what you have been doing to think more in terms of groceries and QSRs, and then that brings with a set of things that you'll have to follow.
Fabulous. Thank you, Subrata. A lot of information there. There is a lot of things happening all over. So let's take a look at what is the market doing. We kind of bucketed these into 3 different topics: the consumer experience, the operational efficiency, and employee empowerment. You kind of hit on those, but Marty, I'm actually going to pick on you for a second. Why don't you talk a little bit around one of these 3 topics and what you're seeing?
Yeah, and by the way, I liked what Subrata went through, because it is exactly what's going on. And if we think about, is this yet another technical thing to do, or yet another way to think about the same things we've done in the past? It turns out that the guiding principle around all of this is a lot of the data that we produce and a lot of the things that we do, you don't actually have to send all that back, as Subrata alluded to, back to the corporate headquarters. You can do a lot of what you're doing out in the field, and you can do it right now. And you have to do it right now because you want to be able to adjust the consumer experience sort of in near real time. As engineers, by the way, we never say real time. Can't say that. It's a physics thing. It's an Einstein thing. It's not okay. But somebody always says, well, can we go any faster? Not on this planet. Not really. So you want to be able to target in real time. And we do, there's a lot of this work going on to say what's happening at that store, what's happening on that shelf. So being able to say, I know what they want and I know how to get it to them, the assurity of supply is key. But I've got to do all of that. And hopefully I can actually reduce the cost of operations. Brought us to some as well. Grocery, in almost every retailer, the margins are fairly thin. So I've got to change my model into this more efficient model. More efficiency means I'm supposed to spend less money. Hopefully, that's the idea. You all here, but a very interesting thing that we put down here is fine granularity and control of technology in each location. And we're going to talk about this in a minute from a technology perspective. It isn't just putting more equipment in a store. It's not about that. It's not about that. And then the last one is the way that we measure effectiveness is around efficacy of store associates as it relates to sales, whether it's square meter, square foot, depends. And so making sure that it's safe for our associates, our employees, to come back into the facility, both from a physical environment as well, from a pandemic perspective, that it's inclusive, by the way, as well. It's culturally and physically safe, and making sure that they can work in a way which reduces errors. So Subrata said something about automation. Right on. The reason McDonald's went that way, the reason Chick-fil-A has gone that way, the reason that Target's going that way is not just because it's cool and I get a better kind of really nice animated menu and that's great. It's, I really want to reduce the errors, because every time I make an error, I lose margin when I do that every single time. So that's what I would add to this, Kristen, just to kind of follow up on what Subrata was mentioning earlier.
Yeah, thank you. I think that links what Subrata is saying is really driving this IoT, right? I mean, IoT comes in many different flavors. And Subrata, maybe just hint on some of these topics. What are you seeing? Any comments on this?
I think we have spoken about every one of these, right? The consumer experience. I'll gravitate to that because a lot of automation is put in place. The traditional thinking was that we are going to make something more efficient. We are going to reduce cost. What we are finding out is that consumer experience is more important than really trying to reduce cost. Consumers are willing to pay slightly higher for the experience that they so expect out of any kind of business. Right. So if you think about the first one, like targeted pricing and promotion, I don't know when was the last time I actually had seen a kind of a flyer, right, if you may, an advertising from a local grocery store. It comes on my phone when I'm there, it pops up, it knows my habits, right? It just directs me to some of the sales or some of the promotions that are going on. We've worked with clients who actually use facial recognition to assess what you are thinking of when you're looking at a particular shelf, and then to kind of incentivize and to give you, so you go buy that product. They work with the manufacturers and send you coupons directly on your phone. cool technologies, and that actually helps both the customer experience and the business. So targeted pricing and promotions, that's kind of top of mind because obviously consumers are willing to pay, but they're also price sensitive.
So how do you increase loyalty and reduce abandonment? Because abandonment is a
Correct.
huge challenge. Yeah, right on.
Correct.
All right, well, we're probably going to have to come back to this. There's so much that we could do a deep dive into. But Marty, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's start looking at the technology. Let's lift under the hood. What's going to happen for us to get to producing these consumer experiences or operational efficiency?
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So this is a pretty high level pass on the technology, but one of the things that I wanted to mention up front, because I'm sure everybody's heard about edge, everybody's heard about IoT. These are complementary terms. And the way to think about it is this idea of edge computing, or edge is what we call an architectural framework or a construct or a model. It's the way you might deploy things and where. And it's all about doing the work where the data resides. I really love that definition. I didn't come up with it at all, but I really love that definition because it kind of sets the context of what this really means. And we realize that with IoT devices, or what used to be called Internet of Things, right? So now they call them edge devices of various shapes and sizes. And you'll see in a few minutes, we're going to talk about things that we're actually finding in the field when we do this work, and we're doing a lot of this work. But a couple of the trends or things to keep in mind are, we're already seeing a fairly massive shift in how software code's actually being written. It's being written with these small devices in mind. And I think that number of 75% is a real number. And 2025 is not that far away. So that shift's already happening. The way things are being built is changing. You have to change actually how you do some of the math when you do this AI at the edge and analytics at the edge. By the way, there's a lot of efficiency with doing it there. As Subrata and Kristen talked about, we have that, like at McDonald's and other places, when you have this ability to tailor in real time, when you get coupons targeted towards you, I need to be able to do that at the store level, at the location level, but I need to change how I do it so it fits in with those devices and handles just that data. The devices themselves are growing in the complexity. So you might say, well, we've had things in stores forever. We've had computers in stores forever. Marty and Kristen, you've been selling, your company has been selling equipment in the stores forever. It's true, but the fundamental form factor has changed, and what those things can do, even when they're really small, has also gotten much more capable, orders of magnitude more capable in really a small amount of time. And just three more things to keep in mind. One is the reason we've seen fairly dramatic growth in edge is not, again, there's a lot of energy around it, but why? Why in the last 18 months, and why really in the last 8 or 10 months has it really gone up? And that is in large part because of COVID and the impacts of pandemics and the need to put a lot of that automation in place, and the need to fundamentally change how you deliver something to a customer, right? We're touchless now. We keep our distance. That's going to remain for a while. There could be another pandemic or some other kind of event that occurs, some unpredicted market disruption. Provenance is very important. So you heard about food safety early. And so one of the big areas that is a trend is the need to know the provenance, where your food came from. Where are the ingredients truly sourced like you expect? The buyers now are looking for that. And it's not just because of medical issues, it's because of lifestyle, right? So some people have allergies and some people just want that lifestyle, and it really has become somewhat pervasive as you look into demographic groups. And finally, and this is something that we spend a lot of time on, is this idea of supply chain assurance. How can I be sure that I'm getting strawberry yogurt on a Tuesday at 9 a.m. in your store, in this particular store? And how do I know what happens when a particular supplier is impacted for that store? Edge enables an ability to do localized tracking for supply chain assurance. So let me let that bake in while I go to this sort of lessons learned view. But that's really where you see a lot of that. and it all flows up into the consumer experience. So a couple of things we've learned, not a couple things, 6 things we've learned while doing this, while building this out. First of all, it means both the deployment model and the sensors themselves. And as I talked about how important and complex they can become. But I want to get right into this idea of 5G. There's a lot of energy, a lot of hype around 5G. It is a real thing. Obviously, it's a real thing. You can buy phones around it. But what does it really mean? It really means I can have millions of devices in a store. Millions, not thousands. I can have millions, up to 3 million. So if you think about like 100,000 square foot store, I could have 3 million devices in that store. That's not how many are in there today. If I have any size store, I can have a density of devices. That's caused a dramatic increase in the desire. But what that leads into is, okay, so I have so many of these things now. Now I have to figure out how to deploy them smartly. And I have to have an ability to manage them. So for those of the that are technically inclined, when we first moved to virtual, VMware, virtual machines, things like that, we want to avoid the sprawl that can occur, right? Because it becomes a management nightmare, and that goes right to cost, right to consumer experience. But then we get into, how do I make sure that I'm secure? Right? There's multiple ways that you might do touch payment. Now my data is not just in the convenience store, but I've got partners in that convenience store. We're going to see a picture in a moment about the different places that you might see in a C store or any kind of small format store. And as I have different partners, how do I make sure that I have both privacy and security? We call that sort of data integrity, right? As the data moves around, it's very important. And then finally, how do I build differently? I mentioned on the other column over here, I'm pointing here like you can see what I'm pointing at. On the left side is this change, this increase that we're going to build. And you're going to have to build differently. And you have to deploy differently. And some of the things you've been using to do that are going to have to change. And so you hear DevSecOps all the time. But what does that really mean? The ability to automatically deploy changes out to that IoT security camera that you just got installed, as an example. And being able to change in real time the rules upon which that camera uses to do detection of a customer entering the store. All those sorts of things are sort of embodied in here. So if we could go, Donna, to the next
So hold on, Marty. I'm going to ask you a question.
Okay.
I got to ask you a question. So, I mean, that what you just described is very complex, right? So if you take a look at the landscape that we have today, no fault of anyone's, that's just the way it was, right? As we need to move to this more agile, what are the, talk a little bit about, what should retailers be demanding from their vendors who are supplying these solutions, right? Containers, microservice architecture. Hit on a few of those things that should be part of that lessons learned, right? Don't go into this in the way that you've been going into. Like, I've got an executable and I can only, make a change, every 3 months or whatever it might be. Hit on that for me.
I don't know if there's 3, but there's 2 big ones. One is that I need flexibility in the devices themselves. I think it's important to be able to change fundamentally how they operate. For example, I'll come back to the security camera and this idea of either worker safety or consumer, movement within a store facility or, physical store security, things like this. I want to have the flexibility to change and to augment and to extend what I'm doing with a particular device. And I want that to be the case for almost any device. I want to have the ability to reprogram it, for lack of a better term. And then the second one is I need the ability to manage, track, and meter these devices. I've got a lot of them. They're going to become cheaper and less expensive as we progress. I'm going to connect all of these wirelessly with 5G, and that's moving very quickly. I've got, and it's not really the most exciting topic, but the ability, we vendors have to provide the ability to manage and maintain these devices so that you can do all the security things you need to do, and you can upgrade them and you can change them out as well. You got to be able to govern them. Kristen.
All right, I'll let you move on. I won't pick on you anymore.
Okay,
no,
okay.
It's a complex world. I mean, we're going to get there's a lot of things that are going to come out of it, a lot of good things. But I think that, if lessons learned anything around technology, the first time of deployment, it's going to be a lesson for all of us, right? So all those goodies come out when you're doing it the first time.
Well, that's right. And so keep those in mind, by the way. Yeah, Subrata, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to add, when people think about edge, quite often I've seen clients get confused and think about it as some kind of a server, some kind of physical infrastructure, which is the case. You talked about sensors, cameras. Don't forget, our smartphone is also an edge device, right? How you push apps, how you push updates to the smartphones, how the customer experience is changing, that matters too. So I know there's the physical things that are in the store over which you have control is one, but then there's the software piece of it, which is really the app that you push out to various individual phones.
Right, so the edge really is the architectural framework, which means it's somewhere beyond central location.
Exactly, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's why I mentioned this management and governance of all these devices. This couldn't be more important, knowing what's going where and how you need to be able to reconfigure it or not, how you can leverage the data or not in location, because you're not going to have complete control as a retailer, as a convenience store operator, for example, over all these devices. They're not all that you buy. They're just used by consumers or by vendors or suppliers that supply to your location.
Or things you already have in your store, right? We
already
have
the things actually in the store.
We already have a gas pump.
Point was let's expand the circle to not just be the physical store, but all the devices that people use, that shipping providers use. These are all part of that edge construct, and then you have certain levels of control that are going to be important depending on your business model. Technology vendors need to be able to provide you the flexibility to govern it in the way that you want. Governance could be more important around data, security, et cetera, and device management itself.
And they're lucky enough to have a Conexxus that sets some of these standards for them so that they don't have to go invent them themselves. That's a huge advantage in this convenience store industry that I've seen.
Especially around the need to move data between. So, and that's a good segue into looking at something like this. And this is one example picture, if you will. But if you look at this for a moment and you go, well, why is there this idea of a pharmacist area? Why is there this boardroom? And you think about all these sort of locations within a store, within a virtual store. What it really is telling you is that as a retailer of some sort, the move towards including lots of partners in your location. So as we know in the convenience store space, Sysco Foods has private label brands. We know that a number of the retailers we work with are moving into the healthcare space. You've heard about it already with Walgreens and CVS, but a lot of others are doing this as well. And the need to bring different partners into your location, and they're going to have their own devices, as Subrata alluded to, says I've got to be able to move that data securely. So having a data standard, Kristen, means that I have a way to have some manageability around moving data between. So for example, you have ATMs in the stores, you have healthcare information, right? And you have pharmacy adjudication systems that might be in the store. I also have fuel, now moving to EV. I have Sysco Foods providing me private label products, for example, within my stores. I might be creating my own. I've got a huge assortment, a huge diversity of categories of things that are going in the store. And everybody's either got their own device or their own data format. And so the ability to move data between in a secure fashion is key. That's one of the key themes here with a picture like this. It's not look at all these different places. It's understand what the implications of that are, this movement of data.
Yeah, so we have about 5 minutes, and I want to before we jump into Q&A. So, Subrata, Marty, I mean, based on this, I mean, you've got a lot of things that you've touched on. Do you want to hit on some of these use cases? Do you want to talk about? I mean, there's lots of things that we didn't talk about necessarily. What about cross-brand loyalty? You've got things on here. that you've been enticing the customer to come into your store, so moving your brand to new sales opportunities. Do you want to hit on a few more of those?
Subrata, you want to take it first, and then I'll add.
Yeah, I can take it first. So, I mean, brand loyalty, I'll start with that, is extremely important, right? How you get your consumers kind of hooked onto your brand. You as consumers, as convenience store owners, know this very well. You have had, I mean, a big source of your revenue in the past, which has been declining right now, is from tobacco and liquor sales, right? So those, as consumers are giving away those habits, they're moving to fresher foods. Again, how do you get that loyalty from them? And to be able to do that, obviously you need to provide them safe, sustainable, and all the other things that we talked about are ways of food supply that they feel comfortable. And if you think in the context of the IoT and the edge, right, there are solutions that we are implementing at clients. I mean, you may have heard it, the cold chain solution, right? How do you know that that ice cream or that piece of meat that you're trying to sell has never gone out of the threshold in which it should be stored? How do you assure that to your clients? Then, if you think about the security solutions that we've had for ages, right, which is computer vision or cameras. How do you use the cameras to read a customer or read what is going on in your store, where the traffic is, how is inventory moving? How do you do that real time so you are able to then really rearrange the shelf maybe for the next day and for the next shift? So those are some of the ones I would highlight about on, and Marty, take it away from me.
Yeah, I would add one of the big areas that will help to enable that IoT and Edge will help enable is assortment flexibility. Your business is going to change, the market's going to change, disruptions are going to happen. You're going to bring in new partners. How do you change assortment and do all the things under the covers that Subrata just mentioned to make sure that now that you've done that, you have what you need when you need it in the market that you need it, based on what the customers actually want. What I see with all of our customers, and if I think about the ones you've heard about, the big retailers, the medium-sized retailers, they're all trying to get the right product in the right place at the right time. At the end of the day, the consumer experience, and so I think it's important to know that IoT and this edge architecture model can make that targeting much more effective than it's ever been.
So a lot of demand planning, a lot of changes in inventory visibility, going to be very important in this new space in order to be competitive.
In an uncertain world, in a truly uncertain, what we call it under uncertainty, which makes it more interesting and more complex.
You guys get all the fun jobs. All right. Well, we can jump into Q&A now. Any last thoughts? I mean, we've got a lot of topics, but I think that Q&A is. I hope that we'll have lots of questions here. I'm going to look at the chat. So I had a few questions in there from some folks, and I'm just going to kind of read from my list here.
Yeah, and by the way, Kristen, I've been posting answers. I think it's David Essel has been posting questions, and I put some answers in there, but we can go over those. Or
yeah, in case everyone didn't see those, we had a couple of questions. We hit on one of them, and that is obviously how data standards make an impact when we're trying to go through this. Some of the other ones was, a good question was 5G. Does it blur the edge? I think that you both can answer that.
Well, Subrata, you want to go first, and then we can discuss what I mentioned here.
Yeah, I'll start on that. I agree, right, with 5G. The promise of 5G really blurs the edge. So I would say with the promise of 5G. However, we still continue to see clients Two things to think about in the context here. One is people want to still be able to operate in a disconnected mode. If your connectivity goes down and your store comes to a halt, you really don't want to be there. And then the second thing is that 5G or any kind of even 4G LTE, they have not yet reached every part of the US. Many of these convenience stores or even the QSRs are in very rural America. As I talk to my clients, one of my clients told me, every time you come and tell me a solution, think about my store in rural Oklahoma and see if it's going to work there. If not, do not come to me with fancy technologies. So something to think about. Marty?
Yeah, I'll add to that by saying I couldn't agree more that in order to really get the 5G speeds you always hear about, you need very high capacity antennas right on your store. It's a very expensive proposition. And so, eventually when two things are going to happen, eventually 5G will become commoditized and, everybody's going to have super fast fiber level speeds. But by that time, we will have outstripped that capacity by pushing more data and more apps across the pipe anyway. The market has a tendency to outstrip the capacity of the technology that we're building. But I think it's going to be a number of years. Theoretically, the speeds are supposed to blur but the real point is this as well, as what you said, Subrata, is cost, which is even if I have 5G, the network providers will obviously charge for network transport, right? So if I can do things by keeping things on premises and just, that's the only place that cares about it, I don't have the cost of pushing that data back over the network. And that can become quite significant. In fact, I'll just end by saying a lot of companies that have begun to move into the cloud space using cloud technologies and cloud providers, one of the biggest things that they're getting hit with is a massive increase in cost, primarily due to network costs. So it's a problem to be very aware of. Technically, good idea, but there's a real cost impact.
Yeah, it always sounds great until you get the bill, right?
That's right.
Marty and Subrata, both of you kind of hit on this. Let's talk about this technology that we're dealing with and the people that are going to use it, right? So Subrata, you hit on, it's going to be high tech versus low tech, and the people who are dealing with it, they can't always, we don't think that the store people should be dealing with this, but what would you recommend to our listeners when we're dealing with this high tech world, when we have low tech people dealing with the technology? What would you recommend how to approach that?
Yeah, I'll start and Marty can add to it. I think user adoption has been the biggest challenge that I have seen with my clients. We put in the latest and greatest technology only to find out that their users are not equipped to use that. So there are a couple of things we think about when we do this. One is really focus on that human portion, right? No solution is going to be successful if people don't use it. Focus on human, meaning talk often, understand how their lives are going to change, train them, communicate often. That's the first piece. The second piece is, in designing any solution, think about designing it on the basis of exception. You really don't want to overwhelm a human being with lots of information. How do you use technology to only show what is relevant to them? And to be able to do that, the third piece I would say is build your solution on personas. What are the various groups of people that are going to interact with your solution, and how do you serve them the information that is relevant to them? So those are the three I would point out. Marty, maybe something else if you want to add.
Subrata, when I heard Kristen's question, I was thinking use cases right away, things with real outcomes. Not just install the antennas or the devices because they're cool, but what are we doing with all of this? Are we doing something with inventory that matters to the bottom line of the business? Are we getting assortments in a better way? Optimize in a certain way? Do we know worker safety? Yeah. It's just a technology, right? It's just a technology and an architecture model, and there's a multitude of ways of doing it. For example, we've been working with a number of retailers who said, I want to do something about knowing whether people have masks on and be able to do something about that. And there's all kinds of technology solutions to do it, but in many of the retail organizations, they just said, well, we're going to put somebody at the front door of the store. You know, it's good enough for what we need to do. And we're like, yes, but we have this amazing thing that can, you know, do these amazing things. And they're like, that's great next year, because we just need to get this done. So, and by the way, in particular in retail, as you said, Subrata, at the beginning of the beginning part of the presentation, but business drivers, essentially, it's a low margin business, right? So this is the point. So I agree, use cases, and of course, personas, who's going to use it, actionability of the outcomes is important.
And so I kind of want to go back to those 3 buckets, right? So oftentimes IoT gets stuck in the operational, right? Versus the experiential. And, you know, as we navigate this world, you know, it's navigating that C-suite, right? And what that's driving those use cases. But to me, to make the ROI, it can't just be operational, it can't just be this, you know, it has to kind of cross all of the landscapes of those 3 buckets. And there could be more buckets. I'd love to hear from the audience. Are there more buckets that we should be looking at? Are there more areas that we can see these IoT devices hitting on? Because it doesn't make sense to just understand what my freezer is doing, to put that, you know, that infrastructure in place, and because you've got security, you've got all those other things. So I'd love to hear from the audience if there's any other buckets, and maybe from Marty and Subrata, have you thought of any other buckets that we missed?
I'm thinking. You know, it's the main ones were you know, cover a lot of examples within each of them. You know, probably one thought is that, and I suppose it depends on your perspective. We also know the importance of security and compliance, and, you know, ensuring data integrity. We talked about those sorts of things. When you do anything like this, you want to make sure that everybody's, you know, their data secure. That might be something we call out as a separate bucket. Sometimes you put it under operational, but, you know, you can think about it transversally, and that may be a really smart way to think about it. That impacts all aspects, and in fact, it's probably the right model, which is the 3 buckets we talked about, plus transversally, sort of compliance and security, maybe on a transversal, vertical versus horizontal kind of view. I might pull that out now thinking more about it.
Yeah, the way when we talk to our clients, when I talk to my clients, the way we think about it is the traditional way is, how do I reduce costs? That's the operational, right? It's very difficult to justify a big technology investment right on the backs of costs only. Then the next question is, okay, how do I either increase my revenue or survive, right? Because my competition is doing it. So that's more increased revenue, customer experience, everything comes into that. Third one is compliance, cost, and security. That is non-negotiable, right? You have to do it. The fourth one I would add to that is just the social impact. People do care about it these days, understanding sustainability, waste reduction, food reduction. You could also call it energy optimization, both as a cost and as sustainability factor. Things that probably are not hard money, that you can quantify, but are very important for your brand and for your business.
And I think some of these things that we're talking about, the return on investment is probably hard to measure, right? And collecting that data, especially if you don't have standards, you can't get that data back out to really measure. But to me, this new world, data is going to tell us everything, and it should be telling us insights that a human being isn't going to see, right? That's the whole point. It's going to tell us the things that we, you know, or at least, you know, we put out a hypothesis, and it's going to come back and confirm or deny that hypothesis. You know, so.
Yeah, I mean, it is very important just to think broadly than just money, right? Because I mean, traditionally, convenience stores are associated with brands, the brands that typically are the gasoline brands that are there. So you have a BP convenience store or a Shell convenience store. That's how people go, right? They have the brand loyalty to that particular gasoline. In the absence of that, how do you attract people? How you still that convenience store itself becomes a brand that you attract people, and that is going to be important to think about.
Anything to add, Marty?
Yeah, I really like the point, by the way, on the previous line about making sure that the brand identity issue, it's not, it isn't, it's about the consumers, it's about the consumers wanting, knowing that the place they're going is someplace they feel safe and comfortable and welcome. In addition, and of course that leads into ultimately making sure that there's sustainable business as well for each company. So there's the consumer experience tied with brand loyalty, and it, it's often it's a difficult thing to sort of zero out that equation, if you will. I do want to say something about the data point you made, Kristen, as well, which is, I think it's important that you're right. Data is, the new oil. It's the gold, right? I mean, it's what, if we can use it, and that's actually a big if. If we can use it, if we can gain some insights from it, stage one. But if we can take those insights and make them actionable in the enterprise, stage two. If we can know what's going on and do something in the business to change the business, if we're not careful, if we're not thoughtful about now moving into this world and saying deploy those millions of devices and whatever it might be, it's just going to be more data and still not to be actionable. So there's a point that we only lightly touched on, which is making sure that if you're going to go down this path and leverage these technologies, it needs to be alongside of the actionability of the insights. If you're going to go get data and you're going to go think about it and you're going to go make a decision, now how do we implement it in the business somehow? What do we do with it? That's often something that's left out.
Yeah, and to that point, let's go back, depending on where that data needs to be seen, the personas, that is going to introduce potentially new IoT devices, right? So how can we alert an associate? My favorite use case is somebody hit the pump stop because they thought it would be funny, and the associates are running around going, why aren't the pumps working? So now they can have a device in their ear or some kind of alert on the point of sale that says pump has stopped, go reset or something, but those whole devices are gonna, maybe let's think about how are we gonna display the action so that our associates know, or display to our category managers that a product, that is a fast product mover is out, and alert to their vendor to restock. There's, that's not a human activity. That's an automated activity, don't you think? Marty's like, well, maybe.
That would be ideal. That would be hyper efficient. And as I sort of made my tongue-in-cheek joke a few minutes ago about the worker safety, and these cameras do amazing things, and you should be able to take automated actions. One of the things the Retail Industry Leaders Association told us was that we can do all that, but we've made a decision not to do anything about it. We've made a decision not to stop people who are not wearing masks coming to stores. We made that decision, especially in the United States. And why? Because they're concerned about the safety of their employees in other ways, and the cost and the impact and the danger to their employees. And so, there's a lot of things we can do. There's something that we do with weather alerting. Hey, there's lightning heading towards the store. Bring everybody inside. We'll send you a text message. And believe it or not, it's not something entirely readily accepted yet, strangely enough. Should be, because they're willing to look at another weather app. But if you implement something specific, so you're right. So just summary is automating, the decision to automate based on some alert or signal. The technology part's not nearly as hard as seems to me, experience. The adoption acceptance and adoption of actually doing it. It makes a lot of sense if I put my engineering hat on. And if I say from an efficiency perspective, and I think from a consulting perspective, and I go, I want to help you be more efficient, there's automation. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. But it seems like adoption and acceptance, we run into quite a bit. Maybe it's organizational, maybe it's skill. The one place where, if I could just add one, just comes to mind, Kristen, the two places where it's working more than it has than other places are McDonald's nationally in the US and Chick-fil-A, which I think is national, maybe mostly East Coast. Nope, especially
we have Chick-fil-A here on the West Coast, so it's
by the way,
long lines and
right,
still closed on Sunday.
And on the West Coast, it's In-N-Out Burger and Chick-fil-A, right? I mean, all the way up to Texas, right? So, but where I was going with that is both of these organizations have done an amazing technical job at completely different structuring what the technology in the stores. And what they've done, they've actually automated the ability to replace a server by like a kid flipping hamburgers in a McDonald's, in high school. Just pull it out, put it in. So it's the first steps of some of these things happening, and they can, as Subrata said earlier, there's a lot of things they can see as you pull up, and they can make some determinations. They actually see the kinds of cars, the number of cars, the color of cars, this sort of thing. They can see certain things and begin to prepare based on that. So I think there's the ability to automate is much greater than the adoption. Maybe that's the summary so far. But there's a few beginning examples. And a great paper Chick-fil-A released on how they did it, by the way, a couple of years ago. Very, very good.
Chick-fil-A is one of my favorite examples of how they've embraced technology. It is incredible, the things that they do, and the way the attitudes of just innovation. And to me, that means they're, better lack of a word, a failed culture, because they're okay to fail. They have to be okay to fail, right? And they figure out their risks and they go for it. So that's a great example. We have about 2 minutes, Subrata. I'm going to turn it to you. Any comments on this or any things that we didn't cover?
No, I think we covered. In fact, I would ask the audience to say if there's areas that you're seeing there that we haven't covered or we haven't answered. Happy to answer them. But I think the bottom line here we were talking about is IoT edge, and I think there's a question that has also come up is IoT is all devices. We didn't really go deep into technology for good reasons, because there are many different technologies out in the market that has to be really designed for the use case that you have in mind. So yes, IoT is a concept, and IoT is, in my mind, IoT is much like what we used to call the internet, right? The World Wide Web used to be a thing. The internet now, it's not anymore. Similarly, IoT, anything you do, I go to my hotel, I turn on the LG TV, it knows a lot about me because it has IoT sensors in there that is connected to data stream that I subscribe to. So IoT is everywhere. Whether we know it or not, it is everywhere. How do you get that same data? I think Marty talked about it earlier, is there's a lot of data that is being collected. How do you use that data to gather information? And based on that information, make some business decision. That is really going to be valuable in this.
Well, I think, we could probably talk this for hours. I think we're all very passionate about this and what it can do. It's a big world. There's a lot of actions. IoT devices can be everywhere. To me, I'd stack it up to think about your architecture, think about your use cases, the business drivers. How can you do cross-vertical in your own org in order to see that return on investment? And Marty, Subrata, I guess I think we might be out of time, but I think
you don't want to ask us for any closing comments. That would be a mistake.
Yeah.
Great talking to you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.